by the low cut in the culty movement more.
What you see here is the crazy, insane, flamboyant personality that is Betty Hutton. She was a movie star, a hit maker, and quite possibly the most outrageous character of the 20th century, in my opinion. A blonde bombshell who saw the limelight, living the American dream that would unfortunately last for a limited time. To all my vault dwellers, Betty Hutton's voice may have been introduced to you through Fallout 4 with her songs He's a Demon, He's a Devil, He's a Doll, and It's a Man. But these tunes don't even scratch the surface of Betty's performances. And now, you're about to find out a bit more about the profile of Betty Hutton. If you can believe it, I actually knew of her existence before the game when I discovered one of her earliest soundy performances of Old Man Mose. I mean, here's this black and white film from 1939 of some woman flailing her arms around and screaming like a maniac, while singing a just as crazy song. She's smacking bandmates across the chest and tripping all over the place. It was love at first sight. The following story is quoted from my favorite classic film organization, TCM. One of the most popular screen performers of the 1940s and early 1950s, Betty Hutton gave unfettered, go-for-broke performances in musicals like Annie Get Your Gun and comedies like The Miracle on Morgan's Creek, 1942. Before enduring one of the grimmest declines in Hollywood's history, she battled her way out of a troubled childhood to become a star on Broadway before making her feature debut in 1942's The Fleet's Inn. Audiences were charmed by her limitless energy and charm, and she soon became a box office draw. The emotional problems of her early years took a toll on her personal life, and by the early 1950s, her career was in decline. Jeopardized by mounting addictions and depression, she vanished from sight until the early 1970s, when she was found recuperating at a rectory in Rhode Island. Hutton mounted a modest comeback, marked by exceptional frankness about her struggles until her death in 2007. Her unsinkable screen persona retained its popularity thanks to home video, which preserved her unique style for decades to come. Born Elizabeth June Thornburg on January 26, 1921 in Battle Creek, Michigan, her early years bordered on the Dickinsane. Her father, railroad foreman Percy Thornburg, deserted Hutton when she was 2, leaving Hutton, her sister Marion, and her mother Maybelle to fend for themselves. The family would not learn of his whereabouts until 1939, when a telegram informed them that he had taken his own life. To support her children, Maybelle Thornburg ran illegal taverns or speakeasies throughout Michigan, from which they were frequently rousted by police. Matters were complicated by Mabel's alcoholism, which was exacerbated by the Great Depression. To help with the family finances, Hutton began singing and dancing on tabletops in her mother's saloons. Her talent was evident even in her early years. By 13, she was singing with groups around Detroit while her mother worked day shifts at an automotive plant. When she turned 15, Hutton headed for New York, determined to break onto the Broadway scene. She was roundly rejected and headed back to Detroit. In 1937, bandolier Vincent Lopez discovered her at a club and hired her as the vocalist for his band. Initially billed as Betty Jane Boyer, she changed her name to the more Hollywood-esque Betty Darling and hit the road with Lopez. The following year, she finally settled on the stage name Betty Hutton, which came from Lopez's consultation with a numerologist. In 1939, she made her on-screen debut with his orchestra in a Vitaphone short, simply titled Vincent Lopez and His Orchestra. 2 more shorts for the company followed, but notably Public Jitterbug No. 1, 1939, an entertaining bit of nonsense that gave the earliest glimpse of Hutton's screen persona, vivacious to a fault, exceptionally talented and effortlessly charming. The following year, Hutton left Lopez's employ to make one of her long-standing dreams come true. She made her Broadway debut in the revue 2 for the Show. The show's producer and future Capitol Records co-founder, B.G. Buddy DeSilva, took a liking to Hutton and cast her for his next Broadway production, Panama Hattie, 1940.
And here is the start of the show.
Opposite reigning musical queen Ethel Merman. According to the show business legend, Merman demanded that Hutton's big number be cut prior to opening night, in an attempt to save face. DeSilva promised Hutton that he would make her a star in motion pictures. Whatever the case, Hutton was signed on to a $1,000 a week deal at Paramount after DeSilva became executive producer there in 1941. Her film debut came the following year in The Fleet's Inn, 1942, a frothy musical with Dorothy Lamour and young comic actor named Eddie Bracken, with whom Hutton would appear in several subsequent films.
Hey there, rookie! You'd better call your cookie and your sweets.
Critics and audiences took to the brassy blonde almost immediately. She was promoted to the second lead in her next film, the all-star wartime musical Star-Spangled Rhythm, 1943. By the time the Motion Picture Herald labeled her the star of tomorrow in a 1942 exhibitor's poll, most of the country had already assumed that about Hutton. From 1943 to 1950, Hutton was among the biggest stars in Hollywood. Paramount was paying her $5,000 a week to appear in its musical comedies, and in 1944, she demonstrated that her talents lay far beyond the genre's limits with an expert turn on Preston Sturges' delirious and scandalous comedy, The Miracle of Morgan's Creek, as a hapless small-town girl who finds herself pregnant but unaware of her father's identity.
Is that all the harder you can hit? For heaven's sake, will you try to do one thing right?
Here.
Hutton proved that she could handle the best comedy writer in Hollywood. More substantive roles soon followed. She played jazz-era showgirl Texas Guinan in Incendiary Blonde, 1945, and silent film star Pearl White in The Perils of Pauline, 1947.
Daring Pearl White, whose amazing screen adventures in The Perils of Pauline have never been matched, outdid them all when she fell in love in a runaway balloon.
Oh, my.
Her greatest screen triumph came in the 1950s Annie Get Your Gun, a big-screen adaptation of a popular stage musical. Hutton replaced the ailing Judy Garland in the role of Annie Oakley and won a Golden Globe nomination for her efforts, though in subsequent interviews, she stated that the experience was a difficult one due to the cast's reluctance to accept her in the role.
Anything you can do, I can do better. I can do anything better than you.
Oh, you can.
Yes, I can.
No, you can't.
Yes, I can.
No, you can't.
Yes, I can. Yes, I can.
However, interviews with her co-stars seem to indicate that any conflict was due to Hutton's single-minded focus on her career. Unfortunately, conflict came to the norm in Hutton's life in the years that followed her success with Annie. She had already experienced some degree of cooling in the regard to her box office status with Dream Lady, 1948, and clashed with De Silva over her contract with Capitol, which led her jumping ship in 1950 to RCA Victor. She enjoyed one more hit movie, Cecil B. DeMille's sudsy circus spectacle, The Greatest Show on Earth, 1952, which she landed by sending the producer a massive floral bouquet before her standing at Paramount collapsed. Hutton demanded that the studio hire her second husband, Charles O'Connor, to direct her next film, but the company balked.
Just so the show rolls. You don't care who it rolls over, who it hurts. So it rolls over me. Be careful someday it doesn't roll over you.
Furious, she broke her contract a year before its expiration, which had a disastrous effect on her career. No feature films came her way for 5 years, and her final project for decades, Spring Reunion, 1957, made a few waves among moviegoers. Determined to wrest control in her own destiny, Hutton plunged heading into live performances in Las Vegas and nightclubs across the country. The response was overwhelmingly positive, so Hutton decided to try her hand at the then new medium of television. In 1954, she was front and center for Satins and Spurs, NBC 1954, a small-screen musical comedy, one of the first to be broadcast in color, with Hutton essentially reprising her Annie role as a rodeo queen who falls for a handsome photographer, Kevin McCarthy. The project was roundly panned by critics, spurring Hutton to announce her retirement from show business. Hutton was absent from the screen for a few years before returning to acting in 1957 for Spring Reunion. Its failure, along with the short network run of her sitcom, The Betty Hutton Show, CBS 1959 to 1960, did little to revitalize her flagging career. Her personal life was in shambles as well. Her marriage to O'Curran ended in 1955, and her third union to Capitol Records executive Alan Livingston, creator of Bozo the Clown and the man who signed the Beatles to Capitol, was reportedly over in less than a year. A fourth marriage to jazz trumpeter Pete Candoli in 1960 also ended in a tumultuous divorce sometime between 1964 and 1967. The constant turmoil made it difficult for her to commit to projects, many of which might have signed a revival of her career, including Jumbo, 1962.
While other little girls were dressing dolls, I was rolling fours the hard way. Now give me those dice.
The bottom truly dropped out for Hutton in 1962 when her mother died in a fire caused by her falling asleep while smoking. Hutton's depression, which has plagued her for most of her life, took hold, as did a growing dependency on sleeping pills. She declared bankruptcy in 1967 and made no public appearances until 1971, when she was the guest in a Hollywood's Christmas parade. Offers of work followed, but Hutton was unable to commit to any of them. Desperately broke and alienated from her children, she had two from her first marriage to photographer Ted Brinskind and lost custody of her daughter Carolyn with Candoli. She suffered a nervous breakdown while on tour in New England in 1973. The Reverend Peter McGuire, Roman Catholic priest in Portsmouth, Rhode Island, became her greatest ally during this period. He convinced her to recuperate at his rectory, where she worked as a cook and housekeeper. The news of her whereabouts made national headlines. In 1974, New York Times columnist Earl Wilson sponsored a benefit for Hutton, which raised $10,000. She began making the rounds on television talk shows, and gave her final acting performance in a 1977 episode of Beretta, ABC 1975 through 78. In 1980, she returned briefly to Broadway in Miss Hannigan in Annie, which generated effusive reviews. A PBS special, Jukebox Saturday Night 1983, devoted a half hour of its time to Hutton, who performed many of her best-loved songs for an adoring crowd and spoke about mounting a comeback.
I'm up here, looking out, wondering what you are thinking about. As I look in each face, I can't help wondering what's taking place.
However, she focused most of her attention on earning a master's degree in psychology from Rhode Island's Sal Regina College in 1986. She stayed on as a faculty member, teaching motion picture and TV classes before heading on to Boston to teach theater at Emerson College. In 1996, Hutton relocated to Palm Springs. Her mentor, Father McGuire, had passed away, and she longed to make a connection with her daughter, Carolyn, who had children of her own.
Carrie, how do you feel about what's happened to your mother over the last couple of years?
It's been really great to watch her progress, because when I lived with her when I was younger was through her hardest time. And it's a miracle to watch what's happened, you know.
A 1994 release of her Capitol singles had sparked a revival of interest in her music, which began popping up on soundtracks for films like L.A. Confidential 1997. A 1996 cover of It's Oh So Quiet by singer Bjork sent record collectors in search of Hutton's own explosive version. In 2000, a long-standing feud between the Irving Berlin estate and MGM came to a conclusion, which allowed Annie Get Your Gun to be released on DVD. To celebrate the occasion, Hutton appeared on the TCM talk show Private Screenings. She was remarkably candid about her ups and downs of her career, including her struggles with addiction and marital strife. More of Hutton's films soon made their way to DVD, as did The Betty Hutton Show. On March 12, 2007, Hutton passed away as a result of the complications from colon cancer. The executor of her estate did not inform the press of her death until after the funeral, which took place at Desert Memorial Park in Palm Springs. At the time, Hutton was working on her memoirs, which were completed by her estate several years later. And that, dear viewer, is the quite successful, quite downward spiraling, and jaw-droppingly reviving story of Betty Hutton. Beyond what you've already heard from the blonde bombshell in Fallout 4, I bet you never would have thought of a story like that. If you ask me, Miss Hutton had the most incredibly outrageous and hilarious attitudes of her time. It's in her film and TV career, and of course her music. If you're looking for a one-stop shop to hear music like hers and literally hundreds more like it, I highly urge you to download my totally free app, A-Bomb Radio, which is available on all major smartphone platforms and TuneIn Radio. If you're feeling generous to our musical cause, visit abombradio.com/donate. For now, Wasteland, I've got to be hitting that dusty trail. Until the next episode, I'm Atomic Wolf.